I watched with, to be honest, some degree of disgust Sergei Lavrov addressing the United Nations General Assembly. And he started off his speech by talking about the horrors of war, particularly the Second World War. And the reason I was disgusted is the irony of this. He's part of an administration, a regime that has waged war on Europe, has killed thousands and thousands and thousands of Ukrainians, but also been responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands, possibly up to a million. We'll never know the true figure of young Russians. So for Lavrov to talk about peace is a cruel joke. Um, I'm heartened to see my fellow Europeans call out Russia, and I'm pleased to see the leadership that Poland and Lithuania and other countries are taking in Europe to stand up to Russian aggression. And I think my country is on the right side of this. I think Yvette Cooper made a strong speech. But there is a danger that this is something that only Europeans see. You know, around the world, a lot of countries have voted in favour of condemning Russian aggression, but there's still a sort of detachment from it on some level. In Europe, we know what Russian aggression is. I'm going to be reading out a report from the Eye in a second about what I consider Russian barbarism. Just a disclaimer before getting to that. When I talk about Russian barbarism, I'm talking about the brutality and the severe human rights abuses of the Putin regime. I'm not talking about 146 million Russians. I'm very aware that there are Russians who have taken great personal risks. Some of them have been sentenced to very long terms in squalid prison conditions. Some have been beaten. Some have been stigmatized. So I'm under no illusions that there are brave Russians who have defied the Putin regime, because one of the narratives that comes from the Kremlin is Russophobia. This idea that all of the problems that Russia faces is down to Russophobia. They never look in the mirror and consider it's their own actions that have made them despised in Europe. But I do sympathise with Russian dissidents who have taken great risks to themselves. Um, and I just wish the rest of the world could see what Europeans do regarding Russian aggression. Um, this is not to say the rest of the world is totally apathetic. There are countries that voted in favour of condemning Russia, but it's Europeans who really are on the forefront of this. And for all those who say that NATO is the aggressor, it isn't NATO that's threatening nuclear war every night on state television. That comes down to psychopathic Russian nationalist television presenters. Even former moderates or so-called moderates like Dmitry Medvedev are now lusting for war. I mean, these people I think are mentally unstable. Anyway, this is a report on what happens to Ukrainians captured by Russia, and it is honestly sickening, but I think it's important to point out this is what I'm reading. This is from the 24th of September, and the report is by Emma Farge. Russia has systematically tortured Ukrainian civilians in over 100 detention centres in Russia and occupied Ukraine since the start of the war, the UN Human Rights Office said yesterday. Its report detailed cases of mock executions, electric shocks, and the use of prolonged stress positions on Ukrainian citizens for non-criminal acts such as criticising Russia's invasion, which it said had proved fatal in some cases. Its widespread and systemic torture. It was documented in every region of occupied territory, as well as dozens of regions inside the Russian Federation, Danielle Bell, head of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, said. Russia's diplomatic mission in Geneva referred questions in the report to the Foreign Affairs Ministry, which did not immediately provide a comment. And you look at some of the atrocities that have happened in Ukraine. There's obviously the massacres of civilians in Bucha, in Kramatorsk, in Sumy, in Mariupol, and numerous other locations. Only in the last few days, as Lavrov was speaking to the UN, we've seen yet more drone attacks, and the latest one of the victims was a 12-year-old girl. This is how the Russian regime operates, and it's why I feel like throwing up when I see people defending Putin. I really feel physically sick. And, I haven't suffered directly from Russia, so if I feel like this, I can only imagine what my Ukrainian friends must feel. Um, we've seen incursions in Europe, we've seen the violations of Estonian airspace. When the Estonian foreign minister was pointing this out, the Russian representative kept looking down at her notes. She couldn't see the evidence, she wouldn't see the evidence. If Russia had made a mistake, why didn't they just say so? Why did they turn off their radar? Um, in Denmark, we've seen, I mentioned the violation of Estonian airspace, also Polish and Romanian. And in Denmark, a drone incursion, just reading out another report here by Jessica Ronsley, a drone incursion that has shut down Copenhagen airport was the most serious attack ever on Denmark's critical infrastructure, the country's Prime Minister said, as NATO's Secretary General said it was too early to rule out Russian involvement. So, they're being cautious and not directly saying this is Russia, but we've seen this many times. We've seen explosions at facilities in the UK, thankfully with no fatalities, but here we're seeing a major European airport affected, Copenhagen. Also Oslo, I believe, was affected. In 2023, London's Gatwick Airport closed its runway for almost an hour after a drone was reported nearby. Now, this doesn't mean that every single drone is going to be Russian, but given Russia's very blatant attempts to test NATO, it wouldn't at all surprise me. I think what Russia's doing right now is a very dangerous game, and I think the kind of testing NATO's resolved because we've seen the unreliability of the United States. I think they're testing NATO's resolve. I do welcome Trump's recent U-turn. He's toughening his stance. He is calling out Putin more, and he has said that Ukraine has a right to shoot down Russian planes. But Trump almost seems to have a split personality on this. He'll say the right thing at one moment, and then he'll talk about Russia and Ukraine like they're two squabbling schoolboys. This is another piece in the Eye, which is quite sobering, my view, by Robert Fox. NATO could be at war within months. These recent incursions really make me think of the build-up to the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and also the events of 1983, Operation Ryan in Russia and Operation Able Archer by NATO. I think we're in a very dangerous situation, and I don't know how this is going to go. If we have a direct head-to-head between NATO and Russia, NATO is significantly more powerful, significantly more. So I don't know if Putin would risk it, but if there was a war, God forbid, directly between NATO and Russia, would China get involved? We know that North Korea's got involved. Would China get involved? I'm not sure that they would get directly involved because that would, weigh them down in what would be a very bloody war in Europe when they have their eyes on Taiwan and the South China Sea. That's certainly a much bigger interest to China. Nevertheless, China today, if we're being absolutely honest, it really is a superpower. I mean, some sources even put the Chinese economy ahead of the United States. So I think at this point, it's a superpower. There's no point being pedantic about it. China is a superpower. Russia isn't. Russia remains a significant power, but it's has been weakened in many ways. And Putin looks like a dictator who is sort of on his last legs. He still has power. I'm not saying he doesn't, but it looks like there's kind of a facade. Trump wasn't wrong on some level when he called Russia a paper tiger, in the sense that, yes, it's a nuclear power. Yes, it keeps, every time it gets setbacks, it keeps pushing hard on Ukraine, yet they do hold back when it comes to outright attacking NATO. I think Russia knows full well that's a war it cannot win. And I don't think China would fancy a direct war with NATO either. Again, NATO versus China, NATO wins. NATO is by far the most powerful military force on earth as a combined force. No question about it. Also with China, it's a powerful country, but China hasn't had direct battle experience in at least over 30 years in any significant way. The last war China had that was of any major significance was the Sino-Vietnamese War of 1978-79. So again, you see that big military parade in Beijing. It looks intimidating, it looks impressive, but the actual battle experience of Chinese troops is negligible. Far, far less than, say, British or French or American troops. So, or Russian, or excuse me, Canadian or Australian. Russia, yes, Russia has a lot of experience, but in what way? Thousands of young Russian men being used as cannon fodder is a bit archaic. Cannons aren't used today, but the point stands. I almost feel sorry for them, not those who have committed war crimes, but ordinary Russian troops who have been sucked into this. And we even see a situation where Indian nationals have been forced to join the Russian army. That's going to be a sore point with New Delhi, which so far has taken a sort of neutral stance. But getting back to the issue of human rights abuses, it's disgusting what Russia does. This is a callous regime. And I've no problem saying I think Putin is evil. I really do. Um, the way the Russian regime operates, they're gangsters. It's like the world's biggest mafia organization. It's really power for power's sake. Might is right. There's absolutely no sense of human dignity, no sense of human rights. It's just might is right, and it's repulsive. And yet, Russian disinformation permeates much of the world. We've just seen in West Africa, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have broken away from the International Criminal Court. And yes, there's long-running tensions with France. My big issue there is, okay, you're denouncing French neocolonialism, whatever the rights and wrongs of that, but you seem happy to be exploited by Russian neocolonialism. I mean, are these countries really happy to be puppets of Russia? Because that's what they will become. If they really want to be so independent and stand up to the great powers, they shouldn't allow themselves to become puppets of Russia. And yet those military juntas are very happy working with Russia. So, that's kind of a contradictory stance. Although it makes sense because they want to do two fingers to Paris, and that's one way to do it. Europeans know of Russia's excesses, at least most Europeans do. We do have quislings in our midst. We do have pro-Russian traitors in our societies. And then you get people, the good people of Hungary and Slovakia are let down by representatives who shamelessly pander to Moscow. For the most part, Europe is united, even leaders of different political backgrounds. I mean, Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, Giorgia Meloni, Emmanuel Macron, Donald Tusk, they all come from different political parties, but there is a united consensus that Russia is a threat to Europe. And I'm emboldened by that. I think it's a good thing. Canada, Australia also support us. United States at the moment it does, but unfortunately with Donald Trump it's uncertain. And let's not forget it's only a few months since Trump gave Putin a platform. So I don't overly trust the United States right now. I wish I could, given American power, but it's difficult to. Nevertheless, if the right side of Donald Trump comes out, the United States is still a major power. It is still a superpower, so it's no bad thing. But with all of this, Russia's severe human rights abuses, kidnapped Ukrainian children are punished if they speak Ukrainian. What we're seeing is absolutely a cultural genocide. It's an effort to wipe out Ukrainian culture, much like Russia tried in the Caucasus. And it's really troubling. The thing with Ukraine too is that it's not just the recent aggression from Russia. It goes way back in their history. The Holodomor in the 1930s, the forced famine at the hands of Stalin, killed at least 3 million Ukrainians. Some estimates are up to 5 million, which makes it one of the biggest crimes of the 20th century. And that has, deep, deep pain in Ukrainian history. Goes without saying I stand with Ukraine, but I just wish that more of the world knew why Ukrainians feel, well, not just Ukrainians, why Europeans in general feel so strongly about Russia. How can we trust a regime? How can we work with a regime that threatens nuclear war on our cities? And the Russian disinformation is on such a big scale. I mean, they say Russia hasn't been respected, it's Russophobia. I point out, Russia was taken in by the West. Russia was a member of the G8. The real mistake of the West hasn't been not respecting Russia, it's been letting Putin get away with it time and time and time again. Putin's a criminal, Putin is a thug. Putin should not be treated as a leader who deserves respect, because he doesn't. He's an evil tyrant responsible for enormous human suffering, not just in Ukraine and Chechnya and Syria, but also in Russia itself. And in Europe, we are seeing Russian aggression. In Britain, we saw Russian aggression at Salisbury. But Putin has plenty of useful idiots across Europe and the West. I think supporting Russia should be stigmatized. I really do believe that. It should be the same as supporting blatant fascism or other extreme ideologies. But I wonder about the morale of Ukrainians when they see their compatriots tortured. And it's overwhelmingly Ukrainians that have suffered, but there's also been volunteers who have courageously fought for the liberation of Ukraine, including British nationals who have been targeted by Russian abuses. I mean, they don't give a damn about respecting POWs. We've seen Ukrainian captives, civilian and military, coming out of Russian custody, looking like they'd come out of a concentration camp. There was a mayor of, I believe he was the former mayor of Kharkiv, and it's a middle-aged man, fairly healthy looking, normal man, moustache, just normal middle-aged man. And he came out, he'd lost a lot of hair, he was extremely thin, he looked like a skeleton, to be quite honest. That's what Russia does to prisoners of war. Contrast to how Ukraine has treated Russia and prisoners of war. Even in the invasion, a country that had been invaded, they gave Russian prisoners water. They let them make calls to their families. Contrast the two countries. How dare Russia call Ukraine a bunch of Nazis? Right now they're behaving far more like Nazis. But Putinism is the biggest threat to Europe, absolutely, since the Third Reich, without question. And I think, I don't know where this is all going to lead. I just hope Putin is surrounded by people who remind him that this would be incredibly foolish to trigger a full war with NATO. I hope it doesn't go there. The First World War, there was sort of a triumphalist carnival atmosphere almost. World War II, it was a different feeling. And if a World War III breaks out, it will be a sober thing. I don't think many people will be triumphalist about it, but if it happens, it will be from Russian aggression.